The morning of December 5th, 1944. Lucherberg, Germany. A concrete building housing what remained of Company F, 2nd Platoon, 415th Infantry Regiment, 104th Infantry Division. Sergeant George Burns stood in a doorway, watching the pre-dawn darkness lift over a devastated German village. His platoon had suffered heavy casualties taking this position. The men who remained were exhausted, low on ammunition, and waiting for what they knew was coming. A counterattack. At 7 o'clock in the morning, all hell broke loose. The sound came first. The distinctive rumble of a diesel engine, the metallic clank of treads on cobblestone getting closer. Then through the smoke and haze of early morning, Burns saw it. A German tank, massive and threatening, its turret open with a German soldier directing fire from the commander's position. The tank's main gun fired point-blank into the village square, hitting an American ammunition truck. The vehicle erupted in flames, rounds cooking off in the intense heat, sending tracer fire in every direction. Burns could have killed the German commander with a single rifle shot. The man was completely exposed, standing in the open turret, shouting orders to his crew. But Burns understood the mathematics of his situation. If he missed, or if the commander simply ducked into the turret, the tank would rotate toward his position and fire. One high explosive shell would collapse the already weakened concrete structure where his entire platoon sheltered. Every man in 2nd Platoon would die. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. He needed to destroy the tank. Burns looked around for a bazooka. There wasn't one. He checked with the other men. No bazooka. No ammunition for it, even if they had one. The tank continued firing methodically into American positions, destroying vehicles, killing soldiers, creating chaos in the carefully established defensive line. Burns made a decision that would either save his platoon or get him killed. He would find a bazooka somewhere in this burning village, and he would use it against a German tank at point-blank range. This decision requires understanding something about the weapon Burns was looking for, and more importantly, understanding what American soldiers in December 1944 actually believed about the bazooka's capabilities against German armor. The beliefs were not aligned with reality. The gap between what soldiers were told and what actually happened when shaped-charge Warhead struck German steel would define the difference between survival and catastrophe for men like George Burns. The bazooka entered American military service in a state of desperate improvisation. Development began in earnest only after the United States entered the war in December 1941. The weapon that emerged was revolutionary in concept but limited in execution. It gave individual infantrymen the theoretical ability to engage armored vehicles without requiring a towed anti-tank gun or artillery support. This was transformative for infantry tactics. A two-man team carrying a tube, a rocket, and determination could potentially stop a tank. The M1 bazooka, the first production variant, consisted of a simple steel tube 54 inches long, weighing just over 13 pounds empty. A soldier shouldered the tube, another soldier loaded a rocket into the rear, and electrical batteries fired the rocket motor through a trigger mechanism. The rocket itself, designated M6, carried a shaped-charge warhead designed to concentrate explosive force into a narrow jet capable of penetrating armor plate. In theory, the shaped charge could defeat armor much thicker than could be penetrated by a solid projectile of equivalent weight. The official specifications seemed impressive. The M6 rocket could penetrate approximately 3 inches of armor plate at 0 degrees of impact angle. Later improvements, particularly the M6A3 rocket introduced in late 1943 for use with the M9 bazooka, increased penetration to approximately 4 inches under ideal conditions. These numbers appeared adequate when compared to the known armor thickness of German tanks. The Panzer IV medium tank, Germany's most numerous armored vehicle, had frontal hull armor of 50 millimeters, approximately 2 inches. Side armor was 30 millimeters, just over an inch. Even the mighty Tiger the Warhead heavy tank had side armor of 82 millimeters, about 3¼ inches. The mathematics suggested the Bazooka could defeat these vehicles. 4 inches of penetration against 3¼ inches of armor. The numbers worked. Training manuals reinforced this belief. Field manuals from 1943 described the Bazooka as effective against enemy armor. Soldiers were instructed in proper firing techniques, told about effective ranges, taught to aim for vulnerable points like tracks, engine compartments, and side armor. The message was clear and consistent. You have a weapon that can stop a tank. But the reality of combat revealed complications that training manuals did not adequately address. Armor penetration in laboratory conditions, where a rocket strikes a flat plate at a perfect 90-degree angle under controlled circumstances, differs dramatically from armor penetration in combat. German tanks did not present themselves as stationary targets with perpendicular surfaces. They moved. They angled their armor. They were equipped with track skirts called Schürzen that provided standoff distance for shaped charges, reducing their effectiveness. The armor itself was not simple homogeneous plate. German armor manufacturing used face-hardened steel with varying quality depending on manufacturing date and facility. More critically, the shaped charge warhead had specific requirements for optimal performance. It needed to detonate at a precise standoff distance from the armor surface to allow the molten metal jet to form properly. It needed to strike at or near perpendicular to maximize penetration. Any deviation from ideal conditions reduced effectiveness dramatically. A rocket striking at a 30-degree angle might fail to penetrate armor it could easily defeat at 90 degrees. A rocket detonating against soft earth sandbags or Schürzen skirts might not penetrate at all. American soldiers learned these limitations through experience. In North Africa, during Operation Torch in November 1942, bazookas were rushed into service with minimal training. The results were disappointing. Soldiers reported that the weapon often failed to stop German tanks. Some of this was attributable to the highly unreliable M6 rocket, which suffered from battery failures and motor malfunctions in the North African heat. But even when the rockets functioned correctly, they frequently failed to achieve the decisive kills that training had promised. By Sicily in July 1943, bazookas had improved with the introduction of the M1A1 launcher and the more reliable M6A1 rocket. American forces were credited with destroying 5 German tanks using bazookas during the Sicily campaign. One of these was a Tiger I heavy tank, destroyed by what was described as an improbable hit through the driver's vision slot. This single success was repeated endlessly in after-action reports and training documents. One Tiger destroyed by a bazooka. But the circumstances of that kill revealed more about luck than capability. The rocket had not penetrated the Tiger's armor. It had gone through a narrow opening, a vision slit perhaps 4 inches wide, and detonated inside the crew compartment. This was not a repeatable tactic. This was extraordinary fortune. Intelligence bulletins from 1943 acknowledged what combat soldiers already knew. The shaped charge of the bazooka could not penetrate the frontal armor of a Tiger tank. The Tiger's frontal hull armor was 100 millimeters thick, nearly 4 inches, and it was angled to increase effective thickness. The frontal turret armor was 102 millimeters. Even the improved M6A3 rocket, with 4 inches of penetration capability under laboratory conditions, could not reliably defeat this armor in combat. The Tiger's side armor, 82 millimeters, was at the absolute limit of what the bazooka could penetrate, and only under perfect conditions with a perpendicular hit. By late 1944, when George Burns and the 104th Infantry Division landed in Europe, German tank designs had evolved further. The Panther medium tank, introduced in 1943, featured sloped frontal armor 80 millimeters thick at 55 degrees. This angling increased effective thickness to approximately 140 millimeters against a perpendicular hit. The bazooka had no chance against a Panther's frontal armor. Even the side armor, 40 to 50 millimeters, became difficult to penetrate when struck at an angle. The disconnect between official capability and actual performance created a dangerous situation for American infantry. Soldiers were issued a weapon, told it was effective against enemy armor, and then discovered in combat that it frequently failed to achieve the promised results. Some soldiers lost faith in the bazooka entirely. Others developed elaborate techniques for getting close enough and positioning themselves to achieve the necessary perpendicular side or rear shots. A few, like George Burns, simply used the weapon they had because no alternative existed. The psychological dimension of this situation cannot be understated. Infantry facing armored vehicles experience a particular kind of terror. A tank is mobile, heavily armed, and nearly invulnerable to small arms fire. It can destroy buildings, crush fortifications, and kill dozens of soldiers while remaining essentially untouchable by rifle fire. The bazooka represented the infantryman's only organic anti-tank capability. When it worked, it was empowering. When it failed, it was devastating. Men died attempting to engage tanks with a weapon that could not penetrate the armor they were shooting at. German tankers understood American anti-tank capabilities and adjusted their tactics accordingly. They knew the bazooka was most dangerous from the sides and rear. They angled their armor whenever possible. They moved quickly through areas where infantry might be positioned with bazookas. They used shirts and skirts on Panthers and Panzer IV specifically to defend against shaped charge weapons. These tactical countermeasures further reduced the bazooka's already limited effectiveness. The situation George Burns faced in Lucherberg on December 5, 1944, encapsulated all these factors. He needed to find a bazooka. He needed to get close enough to a German tank to fire it effectively. He needed the rocket to function properly and strike at a useful angle against vulnerable armor. And he needed to survive the experience. The odds were not favorable. But Burns was a sergeant in the United States Army, responsible for the lives of his remaining men. And the alternative to attempting this impossible task was watching his platoon be destroyed by German armor, firing into their position at point-blank range. The 104th Infantry Division, known as the Timberwolves, had arrived in Europe only 2 months earlier. They landed in France on September 7, 1944, part of the massive Allied buildup following the Normandy invasion. The division's motto was, "Nothing in hell can stop the Timberwolves." It was the kind of aggressive declaration that characterized American military confidence in late 1944. The division was commanded by Major General Terry de la Mesa. Allen, a combat veteran who had previously led the 1st Infantry Division through North Africa and Sicily. The 104th had been activated in September 1942 at Camp Adair, Oregon. The division trained extensively in the Pacific Northwest, then in the deserts of Arizona and California, before finally moving to Camp Carson, Colorado, for final preparations before deployment to Europe. This training emphasized night operations, aggressive infantry tactics, and combined arms coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery. The division was considered well prepared for combat. What they could not train for adequately was the reality of fighting in Western Germany in the winter of 1944 against an enemy that understood it was fighting for survival. By early December, the 104th had been in continuous combat for over a month. They had fought their way through Belgium and across the German border. They had taken Stolberg, cleared Eschweiler, fought for Inden. Each town was a brutal close-quarters battle against German troops defending prepared positions. The division had earned a reputation for effective night operations, attacking after dark when German defenders were less alert. But night attacks were exhausting for the troops conducting them, and casualties accumulated with each engagement. Lucherberg was supposed to fall on December 2nd. The town sat west of the Roer River, part of a network of German defensive positions protecting the approaches to the river. Taking Lucherberg would clear the west bank and position American forces for an eventual crossing into the German interior. But German forces defending Lucherberg were determined and well supplied. They counterattacked repeatedly. The fighting devolved into house-to-house combat, with each building becoming a small fortress that had to be cleared room by room. By December 5th, Company F of the 415th Infantry Regiment held a precarious position in the town. They had taken heavy casualties in the initial assault. 2nd Platoon, George Burns's unit, was under strength. They occupied a concrete building that provided some protection against small arms fire and artillery fragments. But the structure had already been damaged by previous fighting. The roof was weakened. Walls were cracked. It was shelter, but it would not withstand a direct hit from a tank gun. The German counterattack that morning was not a surprise. American intelligence had detected preparations for a counteroffensive. What surprised Burns and 2nd Platoon was the speed and violence of the assault. German infantry, supported by armor, hit the American positions at first light, attempting to dislodge the Americans before they could consolidate their hold on the town. The ammunition truck that exploded had been bringing forward supplies for the defenders. Its destruction not only eliminated those supplies, but created a massive fire that obscured vision and spread confusion throughout the American defensive positions. Burns, watching the German tank methodically destroy American positions, understood that his platoon's survival depended on destroying that tank. But finding a bazooka in the chaos of a burning village under heavy fire was not simple. He left the relative safety of the concrete building and began moving through the rubble, checking destroyed positions, looking for any equipment that might have been abandoned or dropped during the fighting. Other soldiers might have considered this suicidal. Burns considered it necessary. He found a bazooka in the ruins of another building. The launcher appeared undamaged. He found rockets nearby, 3 of them still in their protective packaging. He did not know if the electrical firing system would function. He did not know if the rockets had been damaged by the nearby explosions and fires. He did not have time to conduct any kind of inspection or testing. He grabbed the launcher, grabbed the rockets, and began looking for someone to serve as his loader. The loader was critical. The bazooka required 2 men to operate effectively. 1 man shouldered and aimed the weapon. The second man loaded the rocket, connected the electrical lead to the firing circuit, tapped the gunner's shoulder to indicate the weapon was ready to fire, and then positioned himself clear of the backblast. Burns never learned the name of the soldier who volunteered to be his loader that morning. In the chaos of combat, with men from different units mixed together in the defensive positions, Burns simply found a soldier willing to follow him back toward the German tank. They moved through burning vehicles and damaged buildings, getting as close as they dared to the tank. The German commander was still exposed in the turret, directing fire. German infantry were advancing behind the tank, using it as mobile cover. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Burns found a position with a clear line of sight to the tank's side. This was critical. A frontal shot would be useless. Even if he could penetrate the frontal armor, which was unlikely, the tank's main gun would kill him before he could reload and fire again. He needed a side shot, preferably aimed at the vulnerable engine compartment or the thinner armor between the road wheels. Burns shouldered the launcher. His loader inserted the first rocket, connected the wire, tapped Burns's shoulder. The target was perhaps 30 yards away, close enough that missing would be difficult, close enough that if the tank crew spotted them, machine gun fire would kill them both in seconds. Burns aimed at a point just above the track, where the side hull armor should be thinnest. He fired. The rocket motor ignited with a sharp crack and a flash of flame. The backblast erupted behind Burns in a cone of fire and smoke. The rocket accelerated down the tube, trailing smoke, its stabilizing fins deploying as it left the muzzle. Flight time to target was less than half a second. The shaped charge warhead struck the tank's side armor with a metallic crack. Nothing happened. The tank did not explode. It did not catch fire. The crew did not bail out. The rocket had detonated. Burns was certain of that. He had seen the flash of impact. But the tank continued moving, its turret beginning to traverse toward the position where he had just revealed himself with the distinctive backblast signature of a bazooka. Burns had no time to process what had gone wrong. His loader was already inserting the second rocket, connecting the electrical lead, tapping his shoulder. The German commander was shouting orders, pointing directly at Burns's position. German infantry were moving to flank him. The tank's machine gun opened fire, bullets striking the rubble around him, forcing him to duck. He had perhaps 3 seconds before the main gun would fire and kill both of them. He aimed at a different point, slightly lower, where the side hull met the track assembly. He fired again. This time the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The rocket penetrated the thinner lower hull armor and detonated inside the crew compartment. The tank stopped moving instantly. Flames began pouring from the engine deck vents. Smoke billowed from every opening. The German commander, still exposed in the turret, tried to climb out, but collapsed across the turret ring, either dead or mortally wounded. No other crew members emerged. Burns and his loader moved to a different position immediately. Standing doctrine after firing a bazooka was to relocate before enemy forces could target your last known position. They found cover behind a partially collapsed wall. Burns had 8 rockets remaining from the 3 he had found. His loader had the presence of mind to grab them all before they moved. The battle was not over. German infantry were still in the village. More German tanks might be approaching. Burns needed to understand what had just happened with his first shot so he could make every subsequent shot count. The M9 bazooka Burns was using had entered service in October 1943, replacing the earlier M1 and M1A1 models. It was 61 inches long, weighed just under 16 pounds empty, and could be broken down into 2 sections for easier transport by airborne troops. The weapon fired a 2.36-inch diameter rocket, designated M6A3, which carried a shaped charge warhead designed to concentrate explosive force into a narrow, high-velocity jet capable of penetrating armor. The shaped charge principle was elegant in theory. The warhead contained an explosive charge with a cone-shaped cavity lined with metal, typically copper. When the explosive detonated, the metal liner collapsed inward and was transformed into a high-velocity jet, traveling at speeds exceeding 6,000 meters per second. This jet could penetrate armor much thicker than the warhead itself, not by mechanical force, but by hydrodynamic effects that caused the armor to flow aside like a liquid under extreme pressure. The M6A3 rocket that Burns fired had a maximum penetration capability of approximately 4 inches of homogeneous armor plate under ideal laboratory conditions. These ideal conditions required the rocket to strike at a perpendicular angle, to detonate at the optimal standoff distance from the armor surface, and to impact armor that was not face-hardened or angled to increase effective thickness. In combat, Ideal conditions rarely existed. The German tank Burns had engaged was most likely a Panzer IV medium tank or a Stu-G3 assault gun, the two most numerous German armored vehicles on the Western Front in late 1944. Intelligence reports from 9th Army headquarters indicated that German forces in the Lucherberg area included elements of armored units equipped with these vehicles. Neither was a Tiger tank. The Tiger was far rarer, far heavier, and far more dangerous than anything Burns would likely encounter in this sector. The Panzer IV AOSF-H, the most common variant in service by December 1944, had frontal hull armor of 80 millimeters thickness, approximately 3.1 inches. This armor was vertical, not sloped, which reduced its effective protection but made the tank easier to manufacture. Side armor was 30 millimeters, just over 1 inch. Turret frontal armor was 50 millimeters, approximately 2 inches. The turret sides were also 30 millimeters. The mathematics seemed straightforward. Burns's Bazooka could penetrate 4 inches. The tank's side armor was 1 inch. The rocket should have penetrated easily, but Burns's first shot had failed to achieve any visible effect. The most likely explanation involved the angle of impact and the specific point where the rocket struck. If the rocket hit at a shallow angle rather than perpendicular, its penetration capability was dramatically reduced. A shaped charge warhead striking at 30 degrees from perpendicular might penetrate only half the armor thickness it could defeat at 90 degrees. If Burns's first shot struck at a sufficiently oblique angle, it might have detonated against the armor surface without penetrating, or penetrated only partially, without creating a lethal effect inside the crew compartment. The second possibility involved striking a component that caused the warhead to detonate prematurely or improperly. German tanks by late 1944 were often equipped with Schürzen, thin steel skirts mounted on brackets several inches away from the hull and turret sides. These 5 millimeter armor plates provided no meaningful protection against solid projectiles, but they were highly effective against shaped charge warheads. When a shaped charge rocket struck a Schürzen plate, it detonated several inches away from the actual armor. The jet formed at this greater standoff distance and lost effectiveness before reaching the main armor. Many bazooka rounds that appeared to hit successfully actually detonated against Schürzen and failed to penetrate the armor behind. Burns's second shot, aimed lower at the junction between the side hull and the track assembly, avoided the Schürzen protection that was typically mounted higher on the hull. It also struck thinner armor in an area where the shaped charge jet could penetrate into the vehicle's interior, reaching vital components like ammunition storage, fuel tanks, or crew positions. The rocket functioned as designed. The jet formed properly. The armor was defeated. The tank was destroyed. This was not luck. This was the difference between a shooter who understood his weapon's capabilities and limitations versus one who simply aimed and fired, hoping for the best. The M20 was also easier to handle in the field. It featured a two-piece design that could be quickly assembled and disassembled for transport. The improved sights enhanced accuracy. The weapon was longer and heavier than the original bazooka, but the increased capability justified the additional weight. Development of the M20 was not completed until after World War II ended. The weapon saw no combat against German or Japanese forces. But 5 years later, the M20 Super Bazooka proved its worth in a different war against a different enemy. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. President Harry S. Truman ordered American forces to intervene. The 8th Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Walton Walker, deployed to the Korean Peninsula to push the invaders back across the border. The North Korean People's Army was equipped with Soviet T-34 medium tanks. The T-34 was a formidable vehicle, one of the best tanks produced during World War II. It featured sloped armor ranging from approximately 45 millimeters on the hull sides to 90 millimeters on the turret front. The armor was well angled to increase effective thickness. The tank mounted a powerful 85 millimeter gun. It was mobile, reliable, and battle-proven from years of combat on the Eastern Front in Europe. American forces initially deployed to Korea with World War II-era equipment, including the old 2.36-inch bazooka. The results were disastrous. On July 5, 1950, American forces engaged a North Korean armor near Osan. Soldiers fired their bazookas at advancing T-34 tanks. The rockets bounced off the armor without penetrating. The shaped charge warheads that had been adequate against German Panzer IVs in 1944 were completely ineffective against the heavier, better angled armor of the T-34. American infantry watched in horror as their anti-tank weapons failed to stop enemy armor advancing directly at them. The situation was desperate. American forces were being pushed south by North Korean troops supported by T-34 tanks that American infantry could not stop with organic weapons. Urgent requests were sent back to the United States for better anti-tank weapons. The M20 Super Bazooka, which had been in limited production since the late 1940s, was rushed into service. Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois, which had been producing the M20 in small numbers, accelerated production dramatically. The first shipment of M20 Super Bazookas arrived in Korea 13 days after the war started. Instructors accompanied the weapons to train soldiers on their proper employment. The new bazooka reached American forces while the battle for Daejeon was raging in mid-July. The 24th Infantry Division received the first consignment. The weapon was immediately put into combat. On its first day of use, M20 bazookas were credited with destroying 8 T-34 tanks. The psychological effect on American infantry was immediate and profound. Soldiers who had felt helpless against North Korean armor suddenly had a weapon that worked. The M20 could penetrate T-34 armor from the sides and rear at combat ranges. Even frontal shots, while still difficult, became possible under certain circumstances. The weapon was not perfect. It was heavy, cumbersome, and required soldiers to get dangerously close to enemy tanks. But it worked. That was what mattered. Over the next year, Rock Island Arsenal produced 750 M20 Super Bazookas for deployment to Korea. The weapon remained in American service throughout the Korean War from 1950 to 53. Field reports from Korea showed 82% first-shot success rates against T-34 tanks when employed at proper ranges and angles. This was a dramatic improvement over the old bazooka, which had success rates below 20% against similar targets. The M20 was progressively improved during its service life. The M20A1 variant, introduced in 1952, incorporated improved optical sights and a revised connector latch assembly. The M20B1 variant used cast aluminum construction to reduce weight while maintaining structural integrity. These incremental improvements reflected the Army's commitment to maintaining the bazooka as a viable infantry anti-tank weapon despite the development of newer systems. But the bazooka's days were numbered. By the early 1960s, new anti-tank weapons were entering service that offered significant advantages over the bazooka. The M72 Law, a light anti-tank weapon, was a disposable single-shot rocket launcher that weighed just 5 pounds loaded. Soldiers could carry multiple laws with less effort than carrying a bazooka and ammunition. The M67 recoilless rifle offered greater range and accuracy than the bazooka, though at the cost of increased weight and crew requirements. During the Vietnam War from 1955 to 75, bazookas saw only limited use. The nature of the conflict, with its emphasis on counterinsurgency operations rather than conventional warfare, reduced the need for heavy anti-tank weapons. When anti-tank capability was required, newer weapons like the Loyal were preferred. By the mid-1970s, the bazooka had been completely phased out of American service, replaced by more modern systems. The bazooka's legacy extended far beyond American military use. The weapon had been provided to Allied nations during World War II under Lend-Lease arrangements. After the war, many countries continued using bazookas or developed their own versions based on the American design. The Soviet Union captured American bazookas during World War II and developed their own rocket-propelled grenade launchers influenced by the bazooka's design principles. The RPG series of weapons, still in widespread use today, trace their conceptual lineage back to the American bazooka and the German Panzer IV. The story of George Burns and his bazooka at Lucherberg represents something larger than one soldier's courageous actions in a single battle. It represents the reality of infantry combat in modern industrial warfare. Wars are not won by individual heroes, though individual heroism is often necessary. Wars are won by nations that can produce sufficient quantities of adequate weapons, train sufficient numbers of competent soldiers, and sustain military operations over extended periods despite horrific casualties and setbacks. The bazooka was never the best anti-tank weapon of World War II. German Panzer IVs were more powerful. British Piats had longer range. Soviet anti-tank rifles were more accurate, but the bazooka was good enough, and America produced them in enormous quantities. Over 476,000 bazookas of all types were manufactured during World War II. This number included M1, M1A1, M9, and M9A1 variants. Every American infantry company had multiple bazooka teams. Every soldier received at least basic familiarization training on the weapon. When situations arose requiring infantry to engage armor, the tools were available. This accessibility mattered more than technical perfection. Burns succeeded at Lucherberg not because the bazooka was superior to German armor, but because he had a weapon, he knew how to use it, and he was willing to take extraordinary risks to employ it effectively. The Army had provided him with adequate equipment and adequate training. The rest was up to him. He used initiative, tactical skill, and determination to accomplish a mission that saved his platoon and contributed to holding Lucherberg against German counterattack. The contrast with German forces in late 1944 and 45 is instructive. German tanks were technically superior to American tanks in many respects. German anti-tank guns were more powerful than American equivalents. German infantry weapons were often well designed and effective. But Germany could not produce these weapons in sufficient quantities to arm all its forces adequately. German infantry divisions by late 1944 were chronically short of equipment. Anti-tank weapons were concentrated in specialized units rather than distributed throughout the force. When German infantry encountered American armor without dedicated anti-tank support, they had limited options for effective resistance. American infantry always had options: bazookas for close-range engagement, towed anti-tank guns for medium-range defense, tank destroyers for mobile anti-armor operations, Sherman tanks for combined arms support, artillery for indirect fire against armor, air support when weather permitted. This layered defense meant that American forces could respond effectively to German armor under almost any circumstances. No single weapon system was perfect, but the combination of multiple imperfect systems created a highly effective overall capability. The psychological dimension of this situation cannot be overstated. German soldiers in the final year of the war increasingly understood they were fighting a losing battle. Material shortages were obvious. Allied air superiority was absolute. The overwhelming quantity of American and British equipment was undeniable. German veterans who had survived years of combat on the Eastern Front against Soviet forces understood what industrial warfare meant. They had seen what happened when one side had limitless resources and the other did not. They knew how the war would end. American soldiers, by contrast, gained confidence as the war progressed. Equipment improved steadily. Training incorporated combat lessons. Replacements arrived to fill depleted ranks. Supplies were always available. The machinery of American industrial mobilization was functioning exactly as designed, producing overwhelming material superiority that translated directly into battlefield advantages. Soldiers like Burns understood they were part of a larger system that was winning the war through sustained pressure and overwhelming resources. This understanding created a feedback loop. Confident soldiers took more risks, achieved more successes, gained more confidence. Defeated soldiers became more cautious, achieved fewer successes, lost more confidence. By December 1944, when Burns engaged German armor at Lucherberg, this psychological differential was clearly established. Burns believed his weapon could destroy German tanks if employed correctly. German tankers increasingly believed they were doomed, regardless of their tactical skill or bravery. The broader historical significance of the Bazooka extends beyond World War II and Korea into the present day. The concept of providing infantry with organic anti-tank capability revolutionized infantry tactics. Before the Bazooka, infantry facing armor had two choices. They could run or they could die. The Bazooka gave them a third option. They could fight. This fundamentally changed the relationship between infantry and armor on the battlefield. Modern infantry anti-tank weapons descend directly from the Bazooka. The M72 Law, the AT-4, the Javelin, and similar systems all employ the same basic principle. A shoulder-fired launcher delivers a shaped charge warhead against armored targets. The technology has improved dramatically. Modern systems have longer range, better accuracy, and far greater penetration capability than the World War II Bazooka. But the conceptual foundation remains the same. The tactical doctrine developed around the Bazooka during World War II also remains relevant. Get close. Aim for vulnerable points. Fire multiple rounds if necessary. Relocate after firing. These principles, learned through hard combat experience by soldiers like George Burns, are still taught to infantry today. The specific weapons have changed. The underlying tactical principles have not. George Burns's story reminds us that wars are fought by individual human beings making life or death decisions under impossible pressure. Strategy and logistics matter. Industrial capacity matters. Technology matters. But at the critical moment, in the critical place, success depends on one person deciding to do what needs to be done despite the fear and despite the odds. Burns made that decision twice in 4 months. Many other soldiers made similar decisions in countless engagements throughout the war. Their cumulative courage, multiplied across millions of individual actions, determined the outcome of the largest conflict in human history. The bazooka itself was a crude weapon by modern standards. It was heavy, short-ranged, inaccurate beyond 100 yards, and only marginally effective against the armor it was designed to defeat. But it gave American infantry a fighting chance against enemy armor. In Lucherberg on December 5, 1944, that fighting chance was enough. George Burns, a sergeant from Company F, 2nd Platoon, 415th Infantry Regiment, 104th Infantry Division used an imperfect weapon under perfect circumstances to achieve tactical success that contributed to strategic victory. The officers who might have laughed at the bazooka as a backyard weapon, who might have dismissed it as inadequate for modern warfare, were proven wrong by soldiers like Burns, who made the weapon work through skill, determination, and courage. The bazooka was not perfect, but it was good enough. And in war, good enough combined with overwhelming numbers and unwavering determination wins. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.